I'm Sarah. I own a successful local boutique and live in the suburbs with my husband, James, in the home we've spent 30 years perfecting. This Christmas, my daughter-in-law decided my home was her stage and my traditions were obsolete, but she forgot one detail: I own the stage. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. For 3 decades, Christmas at our house was a masterpiece of consistency and warmth. James and I bought this Victorian fixer-upper when Mark was just a toddler, and every floorboard we sanded, every wall we painted, was done with the holiday season in mind. I am a woman who thrives on order and heritage. As a boutique owner, I understand that branding matters, and this Sarah Miller Christmas was a brand my friends and family looked forward to all year. The scent of real pine, the hand-dipped candles, and the secret recipe roast beef were the pillars of our family's stability. Mark, our only son, had always been the center of this world. He was a quiet, brilliant boy who grew into a successful software engineer. He appreciated the structure I provided. But 3 years ago, he met Jessica. Jessica is a digital influencer, a term I still struggle to say without a hint of skepticism. To her, a room isn't a place to live, it's a set. A meal isn't nourishment, it's content. When they first married, I tried to be the welcoming mother-in-law. I shared my recipes and offered her a seat at the planning table. But Jessica didn't want a seat, she wanted the head of the table. Every year, she pushed a little more, suggesting we swap the heirloom ornaments for minimalist white spheres, or asking if we could cater instead of cook. I always held my ground with a polite smile, thinking she just wanted to feel included. I didn't realize she was actually scouting the territory for a full-scale invasion. This year, the tension reached a boiling point in early November. Usually, I send out the holiday itinerary by the 10th of the month. It's a tradition Linda, my sister, calls the Miller Manifesto. It details the tree trimming date, the Christmas Eve service, and the precise timing of the Christmas Day dinner. But before I could hit send on my email, an invitation popped up in my own inbox. It was a digital, animated flyer with shimmering gold font, a modern minimalist Christmas at the Miller estate, hosted by Jessica Miller. My blood ran cold. She hadn't just changed the menu, she had rebranded my home as the Miller estate and positioned herself as the host. I showed the digital invitation to James. He squinted at the screen, his calloused hands, the hands of a man who had built my boutique's display cases from scratch, trembling slightly. "Since when do we live at an estate?" he asked. I didn't have an answer. I called Mark immediately, but Jessica answered his phone. She told me Mark was in a deep focus session and couldn't be disturbed. "Sarah, darling," she said, her voice dripping with that curated sweetness she uses for her followers. "I knew you'd be stressed about the hosting duties this year. You're getting older, and the boutique is so busy. I've decided to take the burden off your shoulders. I've already booked the decorators and the vegan organic catering team. We're going for a Scandi chic vibe. Very clean. Very now." I was speechless. I told her that I wasn't stressed and that my traditions were the fabric of our family. She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Traditions are just peer pressure from dead people, Sarah. We need to think about the brand. Mark's colleagues are coming this year, and we need to look relevant." The betrayal wasn't just in the planning, it was in the erasure. Over the next few weeks, Jessica moved into my house like a silent shadow. She arrived while I was at the boutique, letting herself in with the spare key Mark had. I returned home one evening to find my collection of hand-painted nutcrackers boxed up in the garage. In their place were stark, faceless
I'm
wooden
Amy
cones.
Harper. I live in a quiet,
My
tree-lined
velvet
suburb
stockings were
behind
replaced
David,
by
and
linen
how was
sacks
Simming
that
and
looked
story
like
speaking new
potato
Corable.
peels.
I'm Amy Harper.
When I
I live in a
confronted
quiet,
Mark,
tree-lined
he looked
suburb behind
exhausted.
David, and how was Simming and
"Mom,
story speaking
please.
new Corable. I'm
It's
Amy
just
Harper.
1 year."
I live in a quiet, tree-lined
Jessica's
suburb
career
behind
is in a
David,
weird
and how
spot,
was Simming
and
and
she
story
needs this
speaking new
content to land
Corable.
a
I'm
major
Amy
home
Harper.
decor
I live in a
partnership.
quiet, tree-lined
Can't
suburb
you just
behind
let her have
David,
this?
and how was Simming and story
It's
speaking
just
new
a house.
Corable. I'm Amy Harper. I live
But
in
it
a
wasn't
quiet
just a
tree-lined
house.
suburb of David,
It was
and
my
how was
life's
saving and
work.
story speaking new
And
Corable.
Jessica
I'm Amy
wasn't just
Harper.
hosting
I
a
live in a
dinner,
quiet
she was
tree-lined
acting like
suburb
she
of
already owned
David,
the
and how
deed.
was saving and story speaking
Chapter
new
3,
Corable.
The
I'm Amy
Discovery,
Harper.
a
I
secret
live in a
plan for my
quiet
empty
tree-lined
nest.
suburb of David,
The
and how
true
was
depth of
saving
the
and story
betrayal
speaking
came to
new
light a week
Corable. I'm
before
Amy Harper.
Christmas.
I live in a quiet
I had come
tree-lined
home
suburb
early
of
because the
David,
boutique
and
was
how was
closed
saving
for a
and story
blizzard.
speaking new Corable.
The
I'm
house
Amy
was
Harper.
quiet,
I
or
live in
so
a
I
quiet
thought,
tree-lined
until I
suburb
heard
of
Jessica's
David,
voice
and
coming
how was
from the
saving and
kitchen.
story speaking new Corable.
She was on a video call, her phone propped up against my grandmother's silver tea service. "No, the lighting in the south wing is perfect for the studio," she was saying. "Once we get them to move into that luxury senior living community in the city, we'll knock out this wall. The Miller Estate brand is going to skyrocket once I have a permanent, high-end backdrop." Mark is already on board, he just doesn't know how to tell his mom yet. But don't worry, the Christmas takeover is the first step in showing them they can't handle the property anymore. I stood in the hallway, frozen. They weren't just changing the decor, they were planning to displace us. My son, my Mark, was on board with sending us to a senior living facility so his wife could have a better background for her "get ready with me" videos. The Christmas takeover wasn't a favor, it was a performance to prove our incompetence. My sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I realized that Jessica's confidence came from her belief that I was a frail, traditional woman who would do anything to keep the peace. She thought my kindness was a weakness. She thought the house was hers for the taking because Mark was the heir. She had forgotten one very important thing about how James and I run our lives. I didn't scream. I didn't storm in. I went to my home office and locked the door. I needed to see exactly what Jessica was telling the world. I created an anonymous account and started scrolling through her content. It was worse than I thought. She had been filming tours of our home for weeks, implying she and Mark had purchased it as a legacy project to care for his aging parents. She had posted photos of my dusty attic, which I was planning to clean in the spring, labeling it as signs of cognitive decline, when your parents can't keep up. She was building a public narrative of our frailty to justify her eventual takeover. I also noticed she was tagging a high-end real estate firm in every post. A quick search of her browser history on the shared family iPad revealed she had already requested an appraisal for our home. But the biggest discovery was the partnership contract she had left in the Miller Estate folder on the kitchen counter. It was a $50,000 deal with a luxury furniture brand, contingent on her hosting a homeownership celebration on Christmas Day. The contract required her to prove she was the primary decision-maker of the household. She had staked her entire professional future on the lie that this house belonged to her. I called Linda. My sister has a degree in law and a heart of pure steel. "Sarah," she said after I explained everything. "You've always been too soft. You want to give her a Christmas she'll never forget? Let her host. Let her spend every dime of her marketing budget on this dinner. Let her invite her important guests." And then, we pulled a rug. We spent the next few days in a whirlwind of legal preparation. I didn't stop Jessica. In fact, I became the helpless mother-in-law she wanted me to be. I feigned confusion over the smart oven she installed. I let her replace my heirloom china with cold, slate plates. I watched as she hired a film crew to document the modern Miller Christmas. Inside, I was vibrating with a quiet fury. James was in on the plan now, too. He was heartbroken by Mark's involvement, but he agreed that our son needed a wake-up call before Jessica ruined all of our lives. We made one specific trip to our lawyer's office to pick up a very important piece of paper. I also made a few adjustments to Jessica's guest list. She had invited her agency reps and the CEO of the furniture company she was courting. I added one more person, a representative from the luxury senior living community she had been scouting for us. I told them we were very interested and wanted a public consultation during our family event. Christmas Day arrived. The house looked like a sterile hospital wing. White flowers, white lights, and a vegan roast that looked like a block of wet cardboard. Jessica was in her element, wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, floating between the cameras and her guests. And here are the previous owners, Jessica chirped, gesturing to James and me as the cameras rolled. My sweet in-laws. We're so happy to provide them with a stress-free holiday before they transition into their next stage of life. The CEO of the furniture brand smiled patronizingly at me. It's a beautiful estate, Jessica. You've done wonders with the legacy you've inherited. Dinner was served. The cameras were positioned to capture the perfect family moment. Jessica stood up to give a toast. To the future of the Miller estate. To new beginnings, and to letting go of the past so we can build something relevant. The room applauded. Mark looked down at his plate, unable to meet my eyes. I stood up. My voice was calm, the voice of a woman who had spent 30 years building a business and a home. That was a lovely toast, Jessica. And you've certainly done a lot with the place. But before we move on to the gift exchange, I have just one question. Jessica smiled, thinking I was going to ask for a photo. Of course, Sarah. Anything. I pulled the legal document from my silk clutch and laid it on the slate plate. I was just wondering. Since you've spent so much time planning our transition to senior living and branding this as your estate, did you happen to check whose name is actually on the deed? The room went silent. The CEO leaned in. Jessica's smile faltered. Sarah, don't be dramatic. Mark is your heir, Anne. Mark is my son, I interrupted. But this house, and the boutique that funded it, are held in a private trust. A trust that James and I control entirely. And as of 4:00 p.m. yesterday, we've updated the terms. Since you're so fond of modern transitions, you'll be interested to know that this estate is actually being listed for sale on January 2nd. James and I are moving to a villa in Tuscany for a year. Which leads to my question, since you've already told your sponsors you own this home to land that $50,000 contract, where exactly are you and Mark going to live next month when the new owners move in? The fallout was spectacular. The cameras stopped rolling. The CEO, realizing the homeownership angle was a fraud, left within 10 minutes. Jessica's modern Christmas collapsed into a heap of white linen and vegan gravy. Mark was devastated. He claimed he didn't know the extent of Jessica's lies, but I told him that silence is a form of permission. He had allowed his wife to disrespect his parents in their own home for the sake of content. I told him we loved him, but the bank of mom and dad was closed, and the Miller estate was no longer his safety net. Jessica tried to scream, then she tried to cry, then she tried to sue. But my sister Linda had made the trust ironclad. The furniture brand dropped Jessica's contract for breach of morality and misrepresentation. She lost thousands of followers overnight when I posted a single, dignified photo of my old nutcrackers back on the mantle with the caption, "Real legacy isn't a brand, it's earned. Happy New Year." James and I didn't actually go to Tuscany, well, not for the whole year. We stayed in our home. We didn't sell it, that was just a bluff to see how fast Jessica would run when the estate disappeared. She and Mark moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. Mark is working double shifts to cover the debt Jessica racked up for her minimalist Christmas. This year, the house smells like real pine again. My nutcrackers are in their rightful place. And Jessica? She's no longer invited. I learned that you can't be a guest in your own life. Sometimes, you have to remind people who actually built the walls they're trying to tear down.